Hey everybody! In this video we're going to compare remakes to originals, specifically to open-world, story-heavy brawlers from Japan, Yakuza Kiwami for the PlayStation 4 and Yakuza for the PS2. Now, Yakuza Kiwami just released recently in 2017 for Western audiences, and Yakuza came out in 2005, again, the following year in the West. With an 11-year gap, the first obvious difference, as with many remakes, is going to be the visuals. But let's dive a little deeper on the differences between the engine used for Yakuza and the engine used for Kiwami. One of the first things I notice about Yakuza is that it looks and feels a little bit like the older Grand Theft Auto games. Movement is pretty tanky, and while the world is populated with a frankly impressive amount of moving three-dimensional character models, they're all still pretty low poly. Knowing what the PlayStation 2 is capable of when there's only a few models on screen, it's obvious a conscious effort was made to emphasize the open-world environment and the hustle and bustle of Kamurocho, that is, the busy, if fictional, entertainment district in Tokyo in which Yakuza takes place. This in mind, the world does end up feeling smaller than it should for one reason in particular: the seams. Maybe it only has this effect on me, but because of how loading and the camera works in the original Yakuza, you can essentially count how many screens make up the game. Totally fine for PlayStation 2 days, mind. But this is one of the, in my mind, essential improvements that Yakuza Kiwami makes. The overworld in Kiwami is seamless, and in addition to this, the camera is not the static object that it is in the original. Kiwami, like most modern games, lets you swing the camera around with the right stick, as opposed to Yakuza, where the right stick controls the minimap? Okay. This is particularly weird because it doesn't seem like it's done this way because the world only looks good from a certain angle, because when you're in combat, you can see different angles through your finishing moves. There don't seem to be any broken or unfinished textures. It makes me wonder if the game was staged this way cinematically. Either way though, that absolutely wouldn't fly today. And honestly, Kiwami is pretty damn cinematic as it is, so this change was definitely for the better. Being able to look at more of this world is a gift, and it helps make Kiryu feel significantly less clunky. Kiwami makes one more important visual change that by far makes up for the loss of the cinematic camera angle, and that is the tweak made to how conversations occur. In Yakuza, conversations are very detached. Even important ones function in the overworld, often obscuring your view just based on how you had your camera when the conversation triggered. This was fixed for Kiwami, where each conversation zooms, placing the characters involved strongly in frame and showing off facial expressions as well as oftentimes voicing characters that were not previously given this luxury. That said, Kiwami does have its own graphical oddities. Looking too closely at any of the NPCs in the overworld can be off-putting, and you won't be able to enter buildings seamlessly until Yakuza 6. But on to gameplay, which I can sum up in a few words: greatly improved. Yakuza is essentially a brawler, or, if you're me, a button-mashing game. Square, 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 triangle, ad nauseum. The RPG element of ability upgrades helps alleviate this. I unlock the ability to hold triangle, for instance, but it still sits in that very fun but repetitive category. Kiwami, on the other hand, took this concept and ran with it, by which I mean they stole the exact same combat from Yakuza 0. Sorry, that's 0 for you non-weebs out there. In addition to being incredibly convenient for the developers as well as anyone playing these back-to-back, since in the States they released only 8 months apart, it helps set up some continuity between Kiwami and its prequel 0. It also helps modernize the feel of the game, giving you more freedom with how you advance your skills in the form of a skill tree system, versus the very simple linear progression of the original. That's to say nothing about the more complicated combos and playstyles that open up. Kiwami allows you to play in 4 fighting styles, swapping between them with ease and experimenting with which one works for you or for specific enemy types and bosses. Don't get me wrong, I still spend most of the game mashing square and triangle because I'm basic as heck, but it's still a lot more fun to do that in 4 different ways, and for someone actually good at fighting games, I'm sure the added complexity is a great relief. Kiwami also adds more variety in terms of finishing moves, and allows you to pull them off without a weapon more often by not requiring you to bodily drag your victim over a wall first. It's a small thing, but being able to take out a downed enemy is a huge improvement in making fights seem more fluid. Using a weapon in your inventory is also done with the push of a button now, instead of requiring a menu, adding to that fluid feeling. However, in terms of faithfulness to the original, I don't feel like anything is lost here. The fights play similarly enough that swapping between the two games isn't disorienting. It's not like you're getting a completely different experience, just an improved one. Kiwami overall feels very faithful to the original, which brings me to my next point: story. This is where Kiwami's true purpose lies, to fill in blanks that newcomers to the Yakuza series might have. Otherwise, there would be no real reason to publish this game, given the fact that Yakuza 0 exists, already stocked to the gills with all of Kiwami's gameplay. This also contributes to the difference in price between Kiwami and 0. I don't think it's unfair to say that Kiwami is sort of like a standalone expansion to 0. But Kiwami has the first Yakuza's story, and it has it just about perfect. Kiwami is recreated shot for shot from Yakuza, every cutscene perfectly represented and timed, even down to when the pitching machines fire and which ones. Even bit characters are faithfully reproduced with care that is frankly baffling to me, especially considering it would be so easy to make tweaks for a modern audience. You know, change a lady's outfit or similar. That's not to say Kiwami doesn't make any changes at all, just not to existing scenes. In fact, Kiwami includes extra scenes in an effort to tidy up elements of the plot and tie things together a little nicer. The effectiveness of this is debatable. Some of these scenes can be a little jarring when paired with existing scenes, and the tone of certain characters is sometimes at odds with the pace that the original plot is trying to take. For instance, Kiwami integrates this Majima everywhere mechanic, where one of the characters from the main story ambushes you in the overworld, forcing fights and making sure you're kept on your toes. And I'm not gonna lie, I love this character, so I love this mechanic. It's very goofy and adds a little levity and humor that I think is charming, on top of helping to build the two characters. But story-wise, it is a little... This would be one of the few places I would say Kiwami is not faithful, but that doesn't mean it's for the worse. The original Yakuza made some interesting choices too, and overall, the story is definitely there, just embellished. And speaking of embellishment, this is where I want to talk about Yakuza, Yakuza, and Yakuza Kiwami. That is, the Japanese and English versions of the original, and how they compare to each other and to the remake. It's important to remember that the original game released in 2005, a time when voice acting in games was really starting to pick up. No longer in its infancy of the early 2000s, but not quite perfected yet, cheesy and over-the-top acting was very common. And more common than that was creative localizations for games from Japan, and it's this phenomenon that really hit Yakuza hard. At this period in time, it was pretty common to take a Japanese title and, in an attempt to make it relatable for a Western audience, pretend that it takes place in America. Ace Attorney suffered this, for instance, which got weirder and weirder as the series carried on. Yakuza, thankfully, doesn't suffer this particular phenomenon, perhaps by virtue of being about, the Yakuza, but there was a sort of blending.
Ow! Hey, the fuck you think you're doing? And just what the fuck family are you from, huh?
Excuse me.
Excuse you? No. Fuck you!
In addition to several of the characters sounding like they just immigrated from New Jersey, the dialogue is sprinkled with a frankly bizarre amount of swearing. Considering the absence of this from Kiwami, I assume this was added during localization. Granted, I'm not fluent in Japanese, so I can't compare the scripts directly, but they sound very close to my ears.
甘いな、キリュウちゃん。甘々や。けじめはしっかりつけんと。まだまだ行くで。ほれ。甘いな、キリュウちゃん。甘々や。けじめはしっかりつけんと。まだまだ行くで。
So, the localization team for the original clearly made a conscious decision to, spice up the dialogue for Western audiences. I would imagine it was intended to add more action, be more exciting, whatever audiences wanted out of games in 2005, but boy, it has not aged well. It's ridiculous. Also, Ishiki here sort of sounds like John Malkovich, so that's weird.
Yeah, right. So what's the deal? You starting your own family?
The mouth flaps also don't match the audio at all, which might not bother a lot of people, but is pretty disorienting to me. So, with all this in mind, Kiwami is strictly in Japanese, with English subtitles, and honestly, I feel like that was a good decision. I don't think a good English dub would have hurt this game, and in fact, I'd be excited to see it, but I can assume the added production cost would have been significant, especially to go the full mile and match flaps. The voice acting for the game as it is absolutely excellent, matching the tone of the original and really capturing the feel of it in a way that the English dub didn't really do.
なんや。
その辺で。
お前のためにやっとんのやろうが。
もう十分ですから。
なんや。
その辺で。
お前のためにやっとんのやろうが。
もう
十分ですから。
What?
That's enough.
I'm doing this because he disrespected you.
He's learned his lesson.
Kiryu in particular, the main character, is very good, sounding very much the strong, silent type he comes across as in the original.
気にするなって言ったろ、シンジ。
気にするなって言ったろ、シンジ。
It's uncanny, actually. Almost like, Jesus Christ, it's the same goddamn dude. This guy's been doing 11 years of Yakuza games. In fact, more than half the original cast came back for Kiwami. Of the 22 total roles that can be cross-referenced on IMDb, 15 of those are played by the same actors, some of those being more or less bit parts. That's 70%. That's baffling. I'm baffled. Kiwami also doesn't have any of the translation issues the English version of Yakuza had, obviously, so everyone's name is correct, and there's very little awkward mixing of Japanese and English in the subtitles. It's nice to have someone say Aniki or Oyabun and have it translated, instead of trying to figure out what it means yourself. None of this just according to Kaikaku garbage. Thank goodness. Kiwami also added or expanded on a few things that were cut from the original Yakuza, including the ability to play Mahjong, which I can only assume is the game I will be forced to play in hell when I die. What does this mean? What does any of this mean? No improvements could be made on the Claw Machine game though, sorry to say, because it was already perfect, thank you. Overall, Kiwami is probably one of the most impressive and faithful remakes I've seen. It doesn't feel weird going from one to the other, it just feels good and nostalgic, almost to a point of being surreal. For anyone who played Yakuza when it came out, or is on the fence about which one to play and wonders if Kiwami is worth it, I'd say absolutely. The improvements made are subtle, but substantial, and heck, it's only $20. Unless you were really attached to the over-the-top acting of Yakuza's English release, I guess.
I see. Kazuma has returned.
God, I'm so sorry. Thanks everyone for watching. If you have suggestions for other games and remakes you'd like to see compared, I'd be thrilled to read your comments. Or if you just want to tell me how you like this one, heck, hit me with it. Feedback keeps me motivated to make this stuff, and input from you guys makes every video better than the last. Thanks again, and happy gaming!